Okay, so this is lesson planning for all ages or for all children. So we're focused on everybody in the early childhood classroom. So we're creating a lesson plan that kind of caters to not just our most advanced learners, but our most basic learners and everybody in between. And we're being really intentional about it. We're not just planning because a book says so or because a calendar says so. So we are planning intentionally for the children we serve. And that's what we're going to get into today. In this training, we will examine the purpose of and the benefits of writing lesson plans. So, why it's important to create a plan and have it written down and planned for. Explore and analyze the parts of a lesson plan, and then develop tools to create effective lesson plans that accommodate all children, including those with individualized education plans and individualized family service plans, IEPs or IFSPs. And with the new Every Child Belongs laws, these are even more important than ever that we are intentional about all students. And the other big piece of it is that we recognize that I'm not going to tell you today that this is how you have to lesson plan. I'm not going to give you a worksheet or a handout and say you have to fill this out. But we're going to say what do you need for your program and what parts of a lesson plan are important to have all the time and what parts are a bit more flexible. So, what do you think a lesson plan is? So share your thoughts. If you are catching the recording, share your thoughts on however you're writing it down. And if you are participating live, feel free to share your thoughts in the chat or come off mute. I think a lesson plan is something we want to intentionally plan and execute to therefore see challenges or yeah, absolutely. It's your lesson plan can be as simple as just a sticky note of today at circle time, I want to ask the kids um what their favorite animal is when we read the book. Or it can be a full hour by hour breakdown of what you're going to do, what you're going to serve, and what materials and activities you're going to do with the children. And we need to do both. We need to have those quick planning ideas that go along with the activities we have throughout the day, and we need to have intentional time built in for what we're going to do at each time. A lesson plan is an educator's plan for navigating the day. Now we're going to go into another reflection activity. And what are some kinds of lesson planning you've done? And then what are some kinds of challenges and successes you've had when you lesson plan? So again, if you're catching the recording, please share your thoughts on the document or piece of paper you're writing on. And then Lewis, what kind of lesson planning have you already done? Intentionally done small group lesson planning. Very cool. Each site's gonna have different times of day. You may be planning the whole day, you may be planning little bits. And then what are some challenges and successes that you've had throughout lesson planning? I know for myself, I would always have, it's hard for me to break a skill down and differentiate. I can, maybe have a really good idea, and then maybe I need to break it into small groups instead of planning for the whole group because it might be too complicated for some kids and need to be broken down differently. So why plan? First of all, planning is key for any high quality early childhood education program. So every program that you're working in throughout the apprenticeship should have some kind of lesson planning. Even in our programs that are play-based. That doesn't mean we're not planning and being intentional. Planning shows that we're professionals. You guys are professional educators, and when you have a plan and when you can tell people about why you're doing things in your classroom, it really sets you apart. Planning shows that we're intentional with the types of activities and the information we want children to learn from. We have objectives that we have to hit. We have developmental milestones, stones and goals that children should be hitting. And when we plan, we can really support where children are and where we want them to be. Planning helps us outline what the objectives, how they'll be met. So it's not just what objectives, but how we're going to get the kids there. If you say that you have a developmental academic program and that your kids are going to learn their ABCs throughout the year, how are you going to get them there? Well, you're going to lesson plan letter activities and letter recognition and sound recognition and break those things down. Planning helps you tie particular standards to an activity. So, actually, this morning I was listening to a podcast from two moms that homeschool, and they were talking about interest-led learning. And it's not just like, oh, sorry. It's not like if your child likes cars, it's not just letting them play on the racetrack with the cars all day long, but it's bringing cars into the other domains of learning. Maybe they're going to go in the math center and count cars. Maybe they're going to go in the writing center and write a manual for how to take care of a car. Maybe they're going to go to the art center and practice with an airbrush paint and paint a car or work on some decals and some practice with fine motor skills and putting them on a car. So again, they're not just racing the car through the tracks all day long as I might want to, but we're going to take that car and use that as the quote unquote vehicle to engage them in other learning. Planning allows us to tie a particular activity to standards, and then planning also ensures that we're being inclusive by considering the needs of each child. If you are planning a really awesome, engaging sensory activity, but you know you've got a couple kids who are a little bit, less, more sensory avoiders, less sensory seekers, how do we engage them in this activity? How do you adapt this activity to bring them into it? I'm picturing in my head the other day, one of my favorite sensory activities is to let kids play with plain gelatin, because it's really fun to squish up and it looks really cool. And so I have seen some really cool sensory setups recently with gelatin and like Arctic animals because it looks like ice or the ocean. And so some kids might be really nervous with that. So offer them gloves, offer them a stick to play with instead of their hands. Offer them a wipe close by and teach them how to clean up. So, what level of engagement do we need to get to so that everyone can enjoy the wonderful activities you're planning? And you're going to have some kids who, the second you let them loose with this activity, are going to be hands, elbows, armpits, chest deep in that big play. So how do we support them too? How do we make sure we're planning that we have, a change of clothes nearby or that we are not going from big, messy sensory play to right outside? We have time to transition. We're planning that. We're also making sure that we're not planning big, messy gelatin day on picture day, because we're being intentional. Planning helps us to organize our thoughts, to make plans more developmentally appropriate, to have appropriate materials available for the activity. So part of lesson planning is not just writing down your plan. That's the biggest part. And that's usually the piece that we usually think about when we think about lesson planning. But there's a whole underneath it to actually preparing those materials. So you've got your plan. When are you printing? When are you copying? When are you laminating? When are you doing whatever else you need to do to prepare those materials to get ready for that lesson? If there are materials that need to be purchased, how does your site have you ask for those? Do you just go to your director and say, hey, I would like to use these things? Does your site have a form you need to fill out for requesting materials? Do you have a budget at the beginning of each year that you have to just spend and then once it's gone, it's gone? What does that look like at your site? And I don't necessarily know what it looks like at your site. Your coach might not either, but we're happy to help you have that conversation with your directors and figure it out if you don't already know the policy. Planning helps us to connect the activity to other curricular areas. So again, if I know that kid loves cars, then we're going to use cars in every area of the classroom. And then when I'm thinking about dramatic play and my, what I want to do next, environmental change, maybe I'm going to make it an automotive shop. But, well, maybe some of the other kids don't really like cars. Maybe they like airplanes. So maybe we're going to make it a travel center instead, where maybe you can rent a car, but maybe you can also catch an airplane somewhere. Maybe you could also get on a boat ride and go somewhere. So what can we do with dramatic play around cars that also supports what other kids in the class want to be learning about? If everybody's really into art, then maybe you take that car body shop even further and you bring in, either if you really have the space, time, and, community support behind your program, maybe you get a body of a car that's kind of damaged and you let the kids really paint on it. And if nothing else, then you get a small, like a cozy coupe car and you take the wheels off and you bring that inside and let the kids paint on it or let them wash it outside and create a car wash station. Um, so then we're mapping in large motor and different sensory, and we brought it outside. But if we're not writing down what we're doing and we're not planning what we're doing, we can't connect it to other areas. It allows you to have a roadmap in your lesson planning, and it allows you to have a better experience in your program. Now we're going to look at the Oregon Early Learning and Kindergarten Guidelines. This is a giant document that outlines the standards that the Oregon Department of Education and the Oregon Department of Early Learning and Care agree that children should be learning in kindergarten and in their early learning settings. So there's 5 domains that are there. They are approaches to learning, social emotional development, language and communication, literacy, and mathematics. And then if you click on this link, it will take you to them. And like I mentioned, it's a huge document, so it's going to take its sweet time opening up. I do not expect you to know these or memorize them, but I do expect you to know that they exist. And so I'll go back to the top. I go to this document frequently, just to go back to it and see. But they break all those domains down into categories and goals for children. And then even further than that, when you look at them, so in approaches to learning, here's what we are looking for in children. We're looking for emotional and behavioral self-regulation, cognitive self-regulation, which is also referred to as executive functioning, initiative and curiosity, and then creativity. And we break those down even further. So in emotional and behavioral regulation, goal number 1 is that children manage their emotions with increasing independence. And there's a progression. So at age 3, developmentally, we're over here, but then by the end of kindergarten, these are where we'd like children to be. So there's places in between. You as an educator can use these as a bit of a guide when you're planning and supporting children's growth. The domains help figure out what subject is being addressed in this particular activity and how to incorporate activities that can help develop the whole child, not just one skill. It is a really, really helpful guide. The Oregon Early Learning and Kindergarten Guidelines. So like I mentioned, these are just some screenshots from it. I just kind of showed as a walkthrough instead. But like if you're going over mathematics, it talks about counting, it talks about operations and algebraic thinking. Who assumes that their 3-year-olds are doing algebra and algebraic thinking? Well, we don't assume it, but they are. And then when you understand that they are, number 1, you can support kids in doing that even further. But number 2, you can tell people. You can communicate to parents what their kids are doing when you understand it a little better and when you're planning it out. Specifically, when looking at social emotional development, the goals are around senses of belonging and identity, emotional functioning, relationships with a trusted adult, and relationships with other children. And so today we're going to focus on that relationships with other children domain. So that second goal is that a child engages in cooperative play with other children, and the competency learning skill is relationship skills. So at age 3, children with the support of an adult often play cooperatively with children. So that supportive adult is there to help the child communicate. And for at least short periods of time during this play, the 3-year-old should work with other children to plan and enact play in a coordinated way. So maybe they're not playing together the entire time, but every once in a while they might check in with each other and they might make sure that their play is on the same track and that they're working towards a similar goal. by the time they're 4 or 5, but not yet in kindergarten. This is where most of our preschoolers are developmentally. They're cooperatively playing with other children in increasingly coordinated ways. So maybe not entirely coordinated, but you as the adult maybe don't have to be there the whole time. Maybe they're going to work it out between each other a little bit more than when they were 3. And they're going to work with children to make plans for what and how they'll work together. So then the kids are having a lot more of that dialogue that you were really helping with at 3. Now they're supporting it with each other. And then when given the opportunity, they coordinated play for longer periods of time. And then, oops, at the start of kindergarten, they should be able to engage in joint play such as coordinated goals, planning, roles, and games with rules with at least one other child at a time. They should show a willingness to include others' ideas during interactions and play. They should demonstrate enjoyment of play with other children through verbal exchanges, smiles, and laughter. And then they should engage in reflection and conversations about past play experiences. So if you are a parent who's getting a child ready for kindergarten, you can go to these and look at where they should be and really practice. And same with you as educators. But you can also look at, some of these by entry to kindergarten indicators and look at that if a child has never been experienced or has never experienced care or education before, and they've always just kind of been home with a caregiver or with family, they may not know how to do some of these things. And that's okay. We can support them wherever they're at. But it gives us a really good understanding of what we can be working towards. So when we look at age groups for planning, it's really ideal to break them down into about 3 sections. So we have birth to 3 are infant toddlers. I'm not your infant toddler gal on the CCR in our team. That would be Rachel or Myra. We have wonderful infant toddler educators who really cater to that brain growth development time and really can support ideas. We need to be really flexible with infant toddler planning, but it's still really important to be intentional with it. Then we have the preschool group. This is about 3 to 5 year olds. I am your gal for this, and this is kind of my jam. And then beyond that, we go into school age, which is planning for 5 to 12 year olds. And even that in my brain is a lot. A 5 year old and a 12 year old are wildly different beasts. And they are going to approach things completely different and are completely different developmental stages themselves. So I even like to break that up even more. And I like to break up like 5 to 8 and like 9 to 12 because I feel like those are much more manageable ranges when looking at interests, activity level, and what they're wanting to get into. But it's a conversation for another day. In general, school age children can handle the same kind of activities. We just need to adapt a little more. Um, this is just a reflection activity. I would like you to do it on your own, and pick what age group that you primarily work with, and plan one activity. So it could be a small group activity, it could be a circle time activity, it could be a table activity. Um, Write down your activity to share with your coach. And then Lewis, please add yours to the chat. Lewis says a color matching sorting activity for 3 to 5 year olds. Absolutely. So that's getting hands and eyes moving, that's matching, that's corresponding, that's telling the differences between same and different. And being able to tell the difference between same and different is one of the biggest pre-reading skills that we can support children with. Because if they can tell you the difference between same and different, they'll be able to identify letters and match letter sounds so much easier. Next, we're going to look at what are goals. And so goals are what students need to learn. So whether the Oregon Early Learning Guidelines set them, or your curriculum set them, or parents set them, um, goals help the overall purpose of the plan. They can be long term or short term. And then how do we apply goals to our lesson plan? So when we're writing lesson plans, we think about what our goals are. They're not necessarily the specific objectives of the lesson, but the overall purpose. So ask yourself, what's the big goal of this activity? Is the goal of this activity to teach children something or to reinforce a skill? Is the goal to break down a skill? Is it to support practice? Is it enrichment? When we're looking at goals, we want to look at what we're trying to achieve at the end of the activity, the lesson, or the program or school year. So again, could be short term, could be long term, um, and we can use other supports. So some different goals might come from our ASQs, our Ages and Stages questionnaires, if you guys use those. Our goals might come from our curriculum or our observation tools like TS Gold or CLASS or ITERS and ECHRS, our environmental rating systems. Our goals could come from the Oregon Early Learning and Kindergarten Guidelines. Your goals could come from your program's philosophy. Um, so for example, when we look at the ASQs in your program, you may notice that many of your groups scored lower in their gross motor skills. So then if you're looking, then you may have a goal of having all of your children increase their large motor skills. And so the objective in that would be that children are able to stand on one foot. So our goal is to increase their ASQ score in the physical development range. And so our objective is going to be to have them stand on one foot, to have them practice running, we're going to plan more skills that support that physical motor development. Um, Lewis says, right, using the ASQs to document where we need to set goals, correct? Absolutely. So looking at those ASQs and looking at what a child is already excelling in, because I like to support where children are excelling too. A lot of times we look at an ASQ or a tool and we're only looking for where children are deficit. Don't get me wrong, that's important. We need to know where children are not meeting benchmarks and standards, and we need to meet them there and support them. But I think it's also really important to look at where children are thriving and excelling and continue to feed that piece as well. So we want to look at both sides. Where are the children struggling and where are they thriving? And how do we keep needing out and focusing on where they need support, but keep nourishing and like kneading into what's already going really well too. And recognize that in your own skills of like, wow, all my children can recognize their names and can recognize the names of each other. And so that means we've been doing a lot of really hard work on this. Good job. Long-term and short-term goals. So a long-term goal in theory would be anything that lasts longer than 6 months. So those are your whole program goals, your real classroom developmental age goals. And then a short-term goal can be handled in a shorter period of time, generally less than 6 months, sometimes even weeks. So our long-term goals may be that preschoolers in my program will be able to recognize the letters in their name before the end of the year. And then a short-term goal may be that toddlers in my program will learn to transition from inside to outside in less time than the beginning of the year. So, with that short-term goal, we're not giving it a time limit. We're not saying that they'll be able to transition in a shorter amount of time within 2 weeks or within a month of practice. It might be the next day that it's a little bit shorter. But just every day, their goal is to transition from being inside to going outside a little bit faster every day. So now I want to look at how do you choose a lesson planning format? And this might be chosen for you by your center. You guys might use a specific form. Your curriculum may have a specific form. Your director or co-teacher may prefer a certain form. So it might not be something that you choose. So always check in with your employer or your training agent first and see if there's something they already want you to use. If not, then you can create your own. You can use a template. There's thousands of templates out there. And now with generative AI, you can talk to, your Claude or your ChatGPT and say, help me create a form that plans this, and the things that are actually in your day. So then you can just fill it in each week. But you want to find a form and a format that works for you. Because like I mentioned at the beginning, I'm going to give you some examples today and some things you can use, but I'm not going to tell you you have to use this because maybe you don't have those times in your program. Maybe you use materials differently. I don't want something standardized because I like that all your programs are different and that you guys get to do it a little bit differently. But in general, you'll have something like your name in it, your dates, and your focus or your themes. You'll have the objectives that you're teaching the week for the week. You'll have the materials that you need, and location would be like, is it in your classroom? Is it in your on the playground? Is it in your maybe you have a large motor space in your program? Your or it could be circle time, or at the tables. Lesson introduction would be, how are you going to introduce this skill? How are you going to tell the whole group what you're doing? The main activity and then the closure. Is there a transition to another activity? What questions you'll ask the students as you're going? And then there's a spot for individualization here. So are there specific children, some simplifications, or some extensions that you've automatically had built in there? Is there any kind of assessment, or how will we know that children have understood the objectives? And then a reflection or self-evaluation. So I think this piece is really, really important, and a lot of lesson planning formats that I've seen recently don't have this reflection or self-evaluation piece built in. And that's okay. But I think it's a really important practice that as you are looking back at the week and like starting to plan for your next week, that you reflect on what went really well and what maybe didn't. And that's okay. There's always going to be things that we plan that we don't get to, that completely fail, and that just don't hit the marks we're trying to go for. And that's okay. But what can you learn from it? What did go well, and what were they unintended consequences? Were they consequences that could have been planned for that you didn't just think about? And do you want to try that lesson again with the new wisdom you have now? Sometimes, yeah, let's try it again. Sometimes, absolutely not. Sometimes, well, maybe we could try this again, but I'm gonna need whatever it is, time, this change, this support. Think about if you did that activity and it was successful, what would that look like? This is a example. This comes from the creative curriculum. So TS Gold, if you use that, or creative curriculum, they use studies as themes. So this was for the ball study. Um, they have an arrival activity every day with the group. Um, so every day it's almost the same. You'll notice they do attendance every day and they sing the welcome song. They ask the question of the day, and then they have helpers if they need any. Um, that for question of the day, that's worked into this curriculum. So these educators who use TS Gold can go into their little question of the day box and pull out number 42 and know what that question is. If you don't have that curriculum already and you want to incorporate question of the day into your program, how are you going to get your questions? Well, you can go on Pinterest. You can create a master list. We can work through it. Ask your coach. We can incorporate anything like that. But if your curriculum doesn't already have it, it's up to you to decide what your classroom needs. They also plan their read alouds and their group times every day. They plan art and sensory activities every day, literacy every day. Um, and these can, again, maybe you're doing your literacy in small groups. Maybe you're doing literacy at circle time and as a big group. Same with math. And what are you doing at transitions, not transmissions? Yes, Mighty Minutes, absolutely. Mighty Minutes is a TS Gold. Instead of a deck of cards, it's your Mighty Minutes are on your phone or your tablet. Yes, wonderful. And then they also, every week, they're planning an anti-bias activity. They're planning, they use this talking about touching. curriculum and second step. So I'm not telling you go use these curriculums. I'm telling you figure out a planning sheet that incorporates the curriculums you use, even if we need to make it ourselves. I'm actually going to give you a 5-minute break. So, Lewis, I will see you back at 12:37. We got that fun little alarm there. Um, Welcome back. Now we're gonna get into the key elements of that lesson plan. Um, like I said, we're not gonna have a standard, but what should kind of be on every plan is the curriculum. And it's okay if you don't use an official curriculum, but if you do, that should be noted somewhere. The activities you're going to do, fairly basic enough, but you don't need to break down all of the how-tos of the activity on your plan. You need to know it, but your activity could just say duck, duck, goose. It doesn't need to say duck, duck, goose, parentheses, gather children, sit them in a circle, pick a goose, tell them to duck each head. That part you can still have, but doesn't need to be on your whole plan. But we want to list out the materials needed. And again, maybe you say in parentheses, refer to X plan for more materials, but if there's definitely things that you need to put energy, time, and effort into preparing and collecting, have them on your plan. The centers and the areas of the class or the program. So if you have a sensory table that you empty out every week or every night, you should have a plan for what you're going to fill it with the next day or the next week. If you switch out your dramatic play every season, then, write down every single week for that season that dramatic play has been the same. Or if your dramatic play evolves at all, maybe your dramatic play at the beginning of the year is a cafe and they're selling lemonades and ice cream because it's still hot outside at the beginning of the school year. But then maybe at, trying to think, was it like Columbus Day? We usually get that October, or Indigenous Peoples Day now, October 12th, we get it off. Usually, so maybe plan to do a small environment change and maybe add hot chocolate to your ice cream stand so you're bringing in a little bit of that winter. Put that change on your lesson plan. Your large group versus small group activities. So if large group, you're going to introduce a new letter sound, and then in your small group, you're going to practice with that letter sound. Plan out both pieces. Plan out what your teacher directed activities are versus what your child directed activities are. Because again, if you're a play-based program and a large part of your day is free play, that's great. I love that, and it should be. But free play doesn't just mean here's all my materials in the classroom, here's everything we have. Kids, go make a choice. Because when we do things like that with little people and a lot of choice, we get overwhelmed. We get dumping and we get reckless abandon and we don't really get learning. But if you can say, all right, class, the classroom is open, you can make your choice. At the sensory table, we have spaghetti noodles and red paint. At the art center, we have some stickers. And at the dramatic play, we have an Italian restaurant where you can serve spaghetti and pizza. And at the Play-Doh table, we're mushing our pizza doughs out. So then children can pick what they're doing. Children have play-based autonomy over where they want to go and what kind of experience they want to have, but you have planned out a whole encompassing avenue or map to get there. And so you have directed them, you have made choice, but then they get choice in how they go and play in it. And if you were doing something like that, and you even took it a step further, and you had a pizza making station where kids could take, an English muffin and put some sauce on it themselves and decorate their own pizza that you then create for snack time for them, that's a teacher directed activity. You are sitting there probably with one, maybe two other children, very small group, and you are directing them through here's the sauce, here's the cheese. You are directing them through that. But over at the Play-Doh table, after your first couple weeks of school, when they know how to behave with Play-Doh, you don't have to sit at that Play-Doh table the whole time. That's a child-driven activity. And yes, you're encouraging them to make a pizza. We want them practicing rolling and pushing because that really builds their fine motor skills. We know that. But maybe when they sit at the Play-Doh, maybe they want to make a bear and do something completely unrelated. And that's us giving them that open material and that choice. And maybe eventually that bear is going to be a whole bear family making his own bear pizza. Maybe not, but that's okay because we have our teacher-driven activities where that child is going to come talk pizza with you and make their own. And then we have their open activities where they get to choose how they want to engage. And then you want to put your objectives on. If you are covering any specific objectives, list them out. And then how you're going to introduce your lessons and activities. And this often, I really like thinking about at the beginning because a lot of times we will make our plan and we as adults think, okay, this is great. This makes sense. We're going to do this. Then we're going to go to this. Then we're going to do this. Then we're going to get these things that I've collected and we're going to use them. But then when we actually get in front of the little people and when we're ready to do it, there kind of gets this disconnect between what we're thinking and what we have planned and what the kids are expecting. And so we need to think about how are we going to discuss this to the children? How are we going to bring them in and engage them and get them ready to participate in this learning with us? And so sometimes we're going to need to upregulate or downregulate the vibes of the room to engage properly. If you're going from outside, big recess, big running, to inside, we don't necessarily want the first thing we do to be super calm, super regulated because we need to come in, we need to have a transition. Something needs to happen in between there. A lot of times I see classrooms that say like, let's go outside and then put the kids right to nap or rest time. And it makes sense. We think, okay, let them have a big activity, then we'll tucker them out and let them go to sleep. But what usually ends up happening is we've created a lot of energy and we haven't dispelled it yet before we go lay them on a mat. And so then we get this really hard to relax on that mat. But what generally seems to work better, have your big play, bring them inside, let them eat something, whether it's a snack or a meal. Then read them a book, let them listen to something and calm their body. Then they're going to be more ready to lay down, calm down, and maybe take their rest time. When we talked about curriculum, you get to pick the curriculum that fits your needs and style. And when I say you, I'm really talking to directors and owners because you guys as educators have some say. And I think you should know about different curriculums and have opinions about what you prefer. But oftentimes you're not the ones funding them or purchasing them. So we want to make sure that what you're using fits. And if you are using a curriculum in your program that you're noticing doesn't really fit the children that you have or the program philosophy that you have, let's have a conversation with you as your have a conversation with your coach, and then maybe we do need to approach your director and say either how do we learn this curriculum better or how do we look at maybe a different option because this might no longer be the best option to serve our children. But there's a variety to use from whether you're a teacher, whether you're a home-based educator, whether you have a center, whether you're in a school district, there are a lot of different options. If you use a specific curriculum, feel free to share it. As coaches, we're really trying to learn what our programs are using. And so we're very interested in the different curriculums that you guys do have access to and are expected to be using. Um, when we look at different activities and what should be on our plan, when it comes to activities, keep in mind the age of the children you're planning for, the interests of the children you're planning for, and remembering that every single child is different. And yes, Lewis, we are always adapting and adjusting our classrooms. I can remember being a teacher and having a couple years like maybe my third, fourth, fifth years of teaching where I was like, oh, I got this. This is great. I understand what I'm doing. I don't have to change anything. And then I got to years 8, 9, 10, and I was like, hold on, this used to work so well. This used to work so well because of the co-teaching team that I had, because of the philosophy of the program that I had, because of the students that I've had. And now we're all the way over here. And the team that I have is different. And the students and their interests are different. And the space that I have is different. And that means I have to be different too. And that's okay. Always changing, always adapting. I used to also believe in my career. I had a mentor who told me that when I'm going into a new school or a new kind of program, give it a whole year. See a whole school year. Once you've seen a whole school year, you'll get it. It'll make sense. Just go through a whole year first. And that used to make a lot of sense. And that used to be reliable. But then we all had the pandemic. We all went through the pandemic. And that event in itself was very traumatic and monumental to a lot of things, but it also shook up a lot of systems and it challenged the status quo in a way that now as much as I still respect that mentor that told me that, just wait a full year. I wish I could go back and shake them and say, like, it's not that simple. Like, some years are just never going to look the same. Some years we just not to learn, we need to learn from them, but like, we need to move on from and just change it up completely. And that's okay. And sometimes you're not going to have the reference point of what worked well before. And that's okay. But it will eventually start to feel better. And we kind of learn to embrace the change. Now I look at every calendar school year and think, well, what's going to be different than this year? What do I think is going to be the same? And then I can plan for what's probably going to be different. We want to have the activity names in our plans, and it should be easy to reference. It should be brief and descriptive, and then avoid cutesy names that don't really focus on the main part of the plan. And there's a lot of reasons for this, but um, in general, your plan should also make it easier for anyone to jump into your role and support you if they need to. If you're not there or you're not able to do the work for whatever reason. So what are some possible names? I want you to think of look at these little girls playing with these blocks. And what would you write on your lesson planning sheet as the activity name here?
I would name it like block stacking or a block
Perfect. Yeah.
stacking activity.
Yeah, block stacking would be great. Outdoor block building, tower building. Absolutely. That's really clear what this is. But if we were to name it something like outdoor building or outside, I mean, outside block time is pretty clear. But if we just called it building time, if we just said building time, I don't know that it's outside. And if I'm your substitute and I read building time on your lesson plan, I may put out little Jenga blocks inside the classroom. This would not be necessarily my idea, but if you wrote on your lesson plan outdoor block building with large blocks, then I would say, okay, I'm taking the big blocks, I'm taking them outside, and we're going to build with them. If you say castle building, then I'm going to assume the children need to be building a castle. But if you just say block building or something that's more general, then I'm not putting my own assumptions in it. So an example activity. So you want to have the name. So the name of the activity here is Songs with Directions. So the age group that this works for is anyone who's 2 to 12. So kind of anyone who can wobble around and listen. The description of the activity, we're going to use songs like Hokey Pokey, Freeze Dance, and Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Toes, and the Chicken Dance during circle time. And then how does it relate to your goal? So it increases gross motor abilities. So again, if you looked at all those ASQs and a lot of your class is struggling with large motor, then at circle time and at well, this is specifically at circle time, how can you bring in those large motor practices? It's tight quarters, it's circle time, so we don't want to lose the attention and let the kids just run and practice big body movement. But we can stay in our circle as a group and we can together work on, hokey pokey and freeze dance and moving our body in those big intentional movements so kids pick up on those skills. Um, Next, I'm going to give you some time to design an activity for the children in your program. Just let me know the name of the activity, the age group it's for, a description, how it relates to your goal, and how it might need to be modified to be more inclusive. As you are thinking and planning, make sure you add this to what you turn into your coach. But I'm just going to think of an activity right here as you're working. The name of the activity is Rubber Glove Cow Milking. It's one of my very favorites. Age group 3 to 6. Description of the activity: you take a rubber glove, fill it with water, and then tie it off at the top. Then you take a pin and you prick little holes in the edges of the fingers, and then you kind of fix it to like the back of a chair or the end of a table so it's hanging off. And children can practice milking the glove to get that fine motor practice, as well as learn about how cows produce milk and how we help them get milk from the cow to our bodies. We could adopt this to be more inclusive by supporting the children as they're milking and offering rags because their hands do get a little wet and sometimes their clothes do, so we can provide alternatives. And then extensions would be that as children ask questions, we answer them. You could show children videos of cows or read books about cows afterwards or the dairy industry. But there's a lot of ways to take it further. I'll give you another minute to work. When it comes to adding materials to your lesson plan, some questions to ask yourself are, what materials do I need for my upcoming lesson plans? Do I have all the materials I need for these activities? And what needs to be prepared for my upcoming lesson plans? So again, if you're, creating collages, cut the pages out of the magazines beforehand. If you're, if you need something laminated, make sure that's done well in advance so that you're ready to show up and teach on the day that it's needed, not ready to show up and create the rest of your lesson plan. So when we look at the movement songs, and we think, well, if we're just singing songs at circle time, it doesn't really seem like a lot of materials are needed, but actually you'll need something to play music on if you're actually playing the song. If you're doing something like freeze dance, we need something to play it on and something to pause it with. And we should also have our music already queued up. So a lot of times, especially if we're not paying for, YouTube or Spotify Premium, that's okay. But there are advertisements that come along with that. And so if we can kind of pre-check our songs, our videos, our apps, then they're more likely to be where we need them to be and kind of paused and ready instead of, oh, let me go find the video, let me go through the ad, let me, answer the question to move on. Sometimes those things can be prepared for ahead of time. And then the other material that we often don't think about is the teacher modeling. So it could be if you're creating some process art, maybe you have an example, but more it's you in the action, you modeling the behavior alongside the children, and that's material that's important. So for the environment in your program, what areas in your program do you need support to lesson plan? So are there areas that are always changing? Are there areas that you feel like you need to switch things up in and plan more space for on a regular basis? Um, Maybe you plan your small group out every single day. Maybe your writing center every single week gets a new theme and new little words to trace and practice in there. Um, Maybe your Maybe your science center is getting something big. So, what areas in your room are you changing up and do you need to plan for? Here are some examples of different ways you can set up your space. So we have number one, this is kind of a a bird's eye view of a center. And so we've got different centers. We've got the word work center, sand table, a writing center, science table, listening center, art center, housekeeping and dramatic play, fine motor and sensory, and a reading center. And so every single week, you can have different materials at each of these centers that go together or that don't. But you can be switching out all these things regularly. And then over here in photograph two, this classroom's a little bit cozier, kind of an in-home setup. But this dollhouse, you can change out the materials of the dollhouse every week. These baskets over here are really great because you can have more baskets that you bring out and switch out. You can have whatever this table is changed up weekly or daily. So some certain common areas that most classrooms have that are changed out fairly regularly or adapted with the block area or a building center, dramatic play, toys and games, kind of manipulative, small motor, art, a library, a discovery and science center, sand or water or a sensory table, and then a music and movement center. Other common areas, maybe your circle time or your group time rug, or you might have a quiet or a calming area, and then we might have an easel. And just kind of one of my big caveats is that your calming, your quiet, your relaxation station, your regulation station, that should not be the same place as your cozy library. I've seen a lot of programs that are like, oh, there's books over there, there's pillows, they can go calm down, they can go read. But I want you to think about the experiences of those children who, the experience of one, a child who's trying to calm down and who's really dysregulated, and then two, a child who's trying to feel emotionally safe and cozy and connect to literacy and storytelling. And they're going to clash in experiences. And so we want to give those children who need those spaces to calm down and re-engage with their brains. We need to give them that space. But then kids who want a cozy, safe reading experience, we need to separate that and give them their library elsewhere. So something to think about as you're planning that I've seen competing against each other far too often. When we look at small group versus large group activities, small group activities are generally more individualized based on skill level. They could be more challenging with direct support. So that zone of proximal impact, what can they do by themselves? What can they do by themselves with your support? And what do they need your help for completely? Um, and then small groups also give you more of an opportunity for one-on-one interactions between educators and children. So these are those that like really the time to get into the nitty-gritty and to work with your students on where they're at and where you need them to go. And then large group time is knowledge directed at the whole group, and it generally helps to build attention spans. Um, and it's usually led by a teacher or an adult. And there may be visuals, songs, books, and open-ended questions to work on engaging children. But there are going to be some kids who really have a hard time engaging in large group. So we have to really creatively problem solve and have gratitude for the challenge that they provide for us there. When we look at teacher-directed activities versus child-directed activities, a teacher-directed activity has the teacher or educator being present to guide the child, and the activity is led by the teacher usually due to a safety concern or needing to observe a particular objective. And then child-directed activities are where a child starts or chooses the activity on their own, and it usually can be based off their interests. I have a video here on child-led learning.
Welcome to this presentation of the 15-minute in-service suite on implementing a curriculum responsively by building on children's interests. This suite describes how education staff in all program settings can implement curricula and partner with families to provide learning experiences that respond to children's interests. This suite is one in a series of modules that help education staff and home visitors implement a research-based curriculum responsively, building on children's and families' cultures and on children's learning, development, and interests. The Framework for Effective Practice, or House Framework, helps us think about the elements needed to support children's preparation and readiness for school. The elements are the foundation, the pillars, and the roof. When connected to one another, they form a single structure that surrounds the family in the center. Because as we implement each component of the house, in partnership with parents and families, we foster children's learning and development. This suite supports the left pillar of the house framework, implementing research-based curriculum and teaching practices. So, why is building on children's interests while implementing curriculum important? Children play an active role in their own learning. When children engage in experiences of interest, they are more likely to demonstrate curiosity and sustain attention for longer periods of time. This helps them engage in deeper explorations. Over time, this intense, deep engagement leads to learning and development across the ELOF domains. Likewise, education staff play an active role in using a curriculum's resources to plan environments, learning experiences, and interactions that respond to children's interests.
Usually Daron, he likes reading books. One or two of them were his favorite books, but as you see, I put different books and he didn't want it. He said, no, not this, not this.
To learn about children's individual interests, look at formal and informal observation data and have conversations with families. If you're a home visitor, ask families to share what they have observed about their children's interests. Even the youngest infants show us what interests them. They may turn their heads, looking and listening in the direction of an interesting object or sound, or they may reach for, touch, grasp, and even chew on interesting objects. As infants become more mobile, they may roll, push, or crawl toward objects and people that catch their attention. Older infants may communicate their interest in an object by pointing. Toddlers and preschoolers might express their interest verbally, saying, that, or I want, or can I have? Children show excitement and curiosity by talking about what interests them throughout their day. When children ask you to repeat the same learning experience, hear the same story, or talk about the same topics, they are showing you what interests them. Teachers and family childcare providers use the curriculum's guidance responsively to set up a learning environment that provides children with opportunities for choice, play, exploration, and experimentation. They may also adjust the curriculum's activities or teaching practices to make them more meaningful and engaging for children in their group. Additionally, planning scheduled time for small groups, large groups, and individual interactions helps teachers and family child providers learn about children's interests. Home visitors collaborate with families to use their home-based curriculum to build on children's interests. For example, home visitors may support families as they communicate during routines and learn about children's interests. Together, home visitors and families may share observations about how children engage when they are interested in objects or topics. Implementing a program's curriculum in ways that respond to children's interests is an ongoing process. The time teachers, family childcare providers, and home visitors take to notice children's interests and discuss them with families provides meaningful information that promotes children's learning across domains. We hope you have new ideas to expand on the ways you learn about children's interests. Use this information to partner with families and to provide environments, learning experiences, and interactions that respond to children's interests. For more information, see the complete 15-minute suite on implementing a curriculum responsive to children's interests, and take a look at our tips and tools and helpful resources.
Great. Now I just need to find my presentation screen again. Okay, here it is. So we have to look at how children choose things and how different kinds of programs can lean into child-led learning. Now we're going to look at goals versus objectives. So your goal is an achievable outcome you establish to start your planning process, and an objective is a specific milestone that you reach on the way to achieving your goal. So the objective addresses the main desired learning outcome for the children, reflects the domain focus and what you want achieved, Objectives are shown throughout the lesson and they're limited, selective, and realistic. So if you look at a lot of the trainings that we do here at CCRNR, they have generally like 2 to 4 objectives at the very most. They are the key pieces that we really want you to walk away with. Um, you may not walk away with them and we may not touch on them, and that's okay. It's not a have to, but it's what we're planning and what when we create something or when we set out to do something, it's what we hope everything supports. All the knowledge we give and all the activities we do, we hope support those objectives. And it's so that you, the learner, whether you the adult learner or you the child in the classroom, so you know what you're expected to be learning and what kinds of things you should be learning. I also think it's important when you're looking at trainings, if the objectives don't match what you learned at all, then maybe look at why. Was the training ineffective? Did you miss a piece of it? Um, there's just things to consider. But your objectives are what you hope that the children will be able to do and understand throughout the lesson. When we get started, you often might question, like, do I pick the objective? Do I pick the activity first? It's a cyclical process. Sometimes you're going to think, okay, these are the objectives I need to master. Let's find activities that support them. And sometimes you're going to find a really cool activity and you're going to think, okay, what objectives are we learning here and what do they support? And it's going to go back and forth and back and bounce. And so generally when we start planning, we don't know our class. We don't have those relationships built, and we don't know what a child's interests are yet. So generally, it's easier to start with objectives and plan activities around that, and then reflect what activities are the kids liking? What are they gravitating towards on their own? And then start to plan out based on main activities that they're interested in, and then filling in the blanks with objectives from there. When writing objectives, you may want to be writing your own objectives based on what you know about young children and developmentally appropriate behavior. Your curriculum may have objectives for you, but when you're writing objectives, you want to describe the materials or the supports that a child will use to engage in the learning process. You want to ask yourself, what behaviors am I hoping to see that a specific child that signifies that the objective has been achieved? So, for example, while Max plays in dramatic play, he will engage and play with another child. So you wrote an objective for Max. So maybe Max has struggled with joining in with peers or with playing with others. So maybe Max really likes dramatic play. So we're going to set an objective in dramatic play, something that Max likes, so that he can feel a little bit more brave and courageous to try his goal of engaging with others. When we look at targeted required objectives or standards, curriculums like TS Gold, your objectives are chosen for each child in your class. And then they're kind of like the Oregon Early Kindergarten Guidelines. They have bands and domain and progressions. They're milestones that will help you achieve things throughout the year. And targeting is really important because it helps educators focus on the top needs for each child and educators plan appropriate activities. So if you look at your standards for the whole year at the beginning, it often looks really intimidating. But if you can take those standards and then look at the kids you have and where they're already excelling, takes the load off your back because you don't have to reteach what they already know. You can support what they already know in getting the skills that they need. When we look at incorporating targeted objectives, your lesson plan will act as your guide when planning specific activities. Children can generally work on about 1 to 2 objectives at a time, and once an objective has been achieved, the educator needs to find a new objective for the child to work towards. So it's not necessarily like, oh, once we've hit a goal, we're done, we're goalless, we're completed. It's always evolving. It's yes, but what's next? We finished that goal. Where do we want to focus next? Do we want to extend that goal? Do we want to branch even further and reach even further in that same domain? Or do we want to reverse it and look at something completely different? Now, maybe an area that we've not necessarily been neglecting, but haven't been focused on because we were focused on that other goal. Maybe it's time to focus there. And then you want to make sure that you're rotating the class that you're working with. Small groups is a great way to do this because if you have small groups rotating, then you know you're going to hit each kid in a fairly one-on-one group setting a couple times a week. But if you don't rotate kids or you don't have intentional small groups like that, you'll have to be more intentional with your time and how you use free play and open play to work on objectives with children. Well, remember we talked about the importance of the introduction. So we want to ask children why they think we're doing this, why they think we're doing the activity, why they think we're doing the lesson, and then listen to their answers. So this is a really important piece here to ask children why they think something is important because we get so much information from their answer. Number one, they may already be a mini subject expert in this subject. They may already have some really great background knowledge on a topic or an activity or a lesson that seems completely new to them because maybe we've never introduced it before, but maybe they really do know about this, or maybe they have some really solid connections already to bring to us. We also want to pre-teach. So before starting a new lesson or activity, we want to show or explain children what they're doing and how they're going to complete it. And then we want to explain the objective. Why are we learning this? So we want to explain to children what you hope they're going to learn from this activity. And a lot of times we need to break it down. So maybe your objective is that they are able to spend a little bit long. Maybe they have a really small sensory cup, and maybe you want them to spend a little bit longer at the sensory table. So, you can say our goal, our objective is to feel messy for 5 minutes, or whatever it is. But we don't need to tell them exactly that we're intending to increase sensory play and decrease sensitivity to negative sensory experiences. It's a lot of words and kids don't understand that. But they can understand I want to engage in messy play for 5 minutes. They know what a timer is. They learn pretty quickly that we use timers to share things and take turns. So if they can see this amount of time for messy play, that's a goal for them. Now I challenge you guys to be culturally responsive in everything you do, but when it comes to lesson planning, we have a unique opportunity. We want to learn from the families that we serve. We want to incorporate their beliefs, their values, and their languages into children's play and culture. We want to modify and enhance our learning environments and experiences based off the information we gather from our families. We want to recognize that culture plays a role not only in our lives, but children and adults in our program also have their own cultures. And as an educator, we want to learn how to educate about other cultures. So we want to use different languages, printed and spoken in your programs, bringing in different books about culture, language, clothing, and food practices, singing songs from different cultures, having items from different cultures in your like traditional clothing or pretend food or instruments or cookbooks. And then here is a video. We're going to watch a little bit of it, not the whole thing.
Welcome to this presentation of the 15-minute in-service suite on a culturally responsive approach to implementing a curriculum. This suite describes how education staff in all program settings can implement curriculum in a way that is responsive to children's and families' cultures. The suite also focuses on how home visitors can use a culturally responsive approach to implementing a curriculum in partnership with families. The Framework for Effective Practice, or HOUSE framework, helps us think about the elements needed to support children's preparation and readiness for school. The elements are the foundation, the pillars, and the roof. When connected to one another, they form a single structure that surrounds the family in the center. Because as we implement each component of the house, in partnership with parents and families, we foster children's learning and development. A culturally responsive approach to implementing a curriculum is an essential part of the left pillar, implementing research-based curriculum and teaching practices. Every individual is rooted in culture, and culture gives us a sense of belonging to a social group. When we implement curriculum in ways that respond to children's cultures, we encourage the development of children's identity and foster a sense of belonging in the learning environment. This presentation is one in a series of modules designed to help education staff, including teachers, family child care providers, and home visitors, implement a research-based curriculum responsively, building on children's and families' cultures and on children's development and interests. Let's start by defining culture. Culture can be described as a set of beliefs, values, and practices shared by a group of people. It often includes specific artifacts, food, customs, music, and traditions. Cultural responsiveness requires that we begin by understanding the role of culture in our own lives. Some parts of our culture are easy to see and hear, like our clothes, food, language, and music. Others are less visible and less straightforward to describe, such as our beliefs about child rearing, health, and family relationships. People differ from each other within cultures too. People who belong to a cultural group may share some beliefs, values, and practices. However, each family makes decisions about the values and beliefs they hold and how they behave. And each of us has choices about the extent to which we participate and pass on the beliefs, values, and practices. Our cultures contribute to our beliefs, values, and practices. For example, the ways we care for children and our goals for children's learning and development. Culture also influences how children interact with adults, manage their emotions, show respect, or engage with stories or songs. Cultural responsiveness begins with recognizing the role that culture plays in our own lives, including how it impacts our work with children and families. Key components of a culturally responsive approach to implementing a curriculum include learning from families and then using that information to modify learning environments and experiences and to engage effectively with children and families. Learning from families is at the heart of culturally responsive practices. Learning from families helps education staff understand the family's expectations, values, languages, and ways of being.
For culture, I would say to be very respectful and to ask a lot of questions. So starting with this family, I wasn't sure, but I always asked, is this okay? Would you like me to do this?
Would you like
do
to
you
start with the
celebrate
reading
this? Do you talk about this?
Then, in partnership with families, education staff use what they've learned to enhance and modify the curriculum's learning experiences to more directly build on children's and families' cultures. Implementing a curriculum responsively means including the backgrounds and home experiences of all the children and providing children with opportunities to learn about other cultures.
Using home language with them, it will help them to be more comfortable to be in the school with us, to be in the school with other children. So they feel they are at home. They feel they are welcome. 这两个里面是怎么样的？
但是有些黑的，有些白的，但是这个是黑的。
Finally, a culturally responsive approach also means that educators provide learning environments and materials that reflect children's and families' cultures and languages. For home visitors, this means partnering with families to use materials and create environments that promote the family's culture and languages. Cultural responsiveness is an ongoing and essential aspect of implementing a curriculum. We learn from families about their culture and use what we learn as we interact with families and children. We also support learning experiences and environments that build on families' cultures. At the same time, we must be aware of how our own cultural backgrounds impact our work. We hope you are inspired to implement your curriculum in a way that is culturally
So looking at culturally responsiveness, basically the big components are that we need to recognize that we exist and we have a culture, but so does every single child and every family that comes into our program. And sometimes we already know a lot about each other's cultures, and sometimes we are learning fresh, and that is all okay. Now we're going to look at individualization, and a lot of times this is a big holdup when it comes to lesson planning because we need to plan something that can fit the whole group, but there's also individual people in that, and we need to accommodate for their own experiences. So let's look at Joey. We're looking at still that objective of large motor. Joey's not yet able to stand on one foot. So, an objective for Joey is that during songs with directions, we will incorporate alternating feet to give him practice. So, with Joey, we're going to be doing a lot of stomping and marching and moving our bodies from one way to the other to shift that weight and get him practicing. Sarah is not yet able to kick a ball by swinging her foot forward. So maybe she can stand on one foot, she can start to hop on it, but she doesn't have that body ability and the eye motion to be able to kick her foot at something stationary at the same time as balancing. So for her, during songs with directions, we will do the hokey pokey to give her a chance to swing her foot. So when we sing the hokey pokey and we shake our feet, we're standing on one foot and we're shaking and balancing. So she's got her eyes focusing and her body doing something. And then for Juan, he's not yet able to jump with both feet leaving the floor. So when children are first starting to jump, they kind of do this like gallop, like two-footed situation where they'll bring up one foot, then pull up the other one. So for him, I want you to write down what you think an objective could be for Juan. So he is not yet able to jump with both feet leaving the floor. So what do you guys think? Be sure to just add something on the sheet that you turn into your coach, but some objectives for Juan could be that, we practice, star jumps, or when during songs with directions, we practice freezing and jumping so he can work on getting his body moving like that. And now when we look at IFSPs and IEPs, this is also kind of a touchy area sometimes where it's a little nerve-wracking because a lot of times as educators, we are not clinicians, we are not diagnosticians, we are not often highly trained in special education. So we are looking at accommodations based on the relationships we have with these students and how we know they learn best. But we also want to take that data and those important things from the professionals into account. So we want to make sure that if you have a child in your classroom who has an IFSP or an IEP, make sure that you understand and that you review their goals frequently. Make sure that goals are incorporated into your lesson plans and make sure that your modifications and accommodations are made for each child, keeping in mind how you can make their experience in your classroom more equitable. We want to be providing the supports that every child needs to have the same kind of experience. And we want to keep in mind that you to keep the goals measurable and achievable for each child. We want children to feel successful, and we need these goals really, really broken down in tiny and stackable so success can happen. And then it's really important to include families. Families are a really key component here because they have previous background knowledge on the child that we don't have, and their goals matter. Now I'm going to ask you to try it out. So please include this in your form for your coach for credit, or Lewis, add yours to the chat or come off mute. But you are planning a lesson teaching children the name for various emotions. For this activity, you have cue cards with different faces on them displaying different emotions. And at circle time, you plan to ask the large group what the person on the card is feeling. One of your students, Natalie, is nonverbal and doesn't use words to speak. How might you differentiate your lesson to include Natalie in the activity?
Could I act out how I'm feeling or show my facial expression to her so she has an idea of what feeling, and maybe having a visual for her matching my face or using my face or her face, demonstrating that feeling?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it might be a little more powerful if you asked her to show the face, because again, if she's looking at your face and a card, she might not still be able to differentiate those two things in front of her. But if she can act it out, or you might have, your cards and then a smaller version of your cards for her to point to, or yeah, a mirror so she can make the faces back. Yeah, absolutely. When we look at differentiation and adaptation, it's important that educators differentiate instructional approaches to match the child's interests, knowledge, and skills. So like this reminds me, there's a really funny episode. Every episode of Abbott Elementary is hilarious. But there's one where the teacher's having a really hard time because the second grader is obsessed with Bluey and keeps speaking in this like silly Australian accent. And the teacher's getting really annoyed, and he's like, I don't know what to do. And at the end, finally, he's teaching the children about the states of matter, so solid, liquid, and gas. But he does it with Bluey and Bingo, and he brings them in. And the lesson has nothing to do with Bluey and Bingo. It has nothing to do with even Australian culture or media, but that was what the children needed to be interested in and to stay on task with the science that the teacher really needed. So when you educate or when you recognize that your group of kids, some kids are going to need you to explain it verbally. Some kids are going to need to see the example. Some kids are going to need to get their arms elbow deep in the mess and feel it to understand what you're saying. But you know your kids best and you get control over how you present and differentiate and adapt materials for them. Scaffolding can also take a variety of forms, so you can give children hints, you can provide a cue, you can model the skill, or you could adapt the materials or the activities to the child in the moment. And then peers can really, really, really be effective providers of that scaffolding because when children see their peers doing something, it not only enforces in their brain the confidence of somebody their age doing the same thing, but it also shows them physically how the child, like it gives them a really strong model because sometimes we as adults can model things for children, but they don't really click it until they see another child doing it and how the child does it. So sometimes that's all they need. Now, we're going to look at trauma-informed care, and it feels kind of random to just throw right here. I like to look at a trauma-informed practice as a lifestyle and as a lens for which I look at everything that I do with children, because ultimately I see children as people that need to be protected from traumas, and that people who have already experienced trauma and are healing on all kinds of levels. But a trauma-informed approach to lesson planning says that the approach used in the program supports children in preparation of or during a time of a trauma response. So your programs are going to have things that create trauma responses in children. There's no way around it, and it's not necessarily our faults, but it's going to happen, and we need to be proactive and responsive to it. And then how we can do that is by setting up trauma-informed spaces and trauma-informed activities. So what is a trauma or a stress response? This could be anything from our trauma responses could be in the form of language or communication. We may lack empathy. When traumatized, we may lack the language or the ability to verbalize what we're trying to say. We could have social and emotional responses. We might have behavior impulses or misunderstandings might become more frequent. Our body language might be more hostile. When it comes to building relationships under a trauma or a stress response, there's often a barrier immediately when it comes to trust and already an emotional distance. And then there's often some withdrawal, whether physical withdrawal or emotional withdrawal. So brain research shows that when children encounter a perceived threat to their physical or mental psychological safety, their brain triggers a chemical and neurological reaction, and this is your stress response. So in response to the stress response, our bodies have the biological instinct to either fight, freeze, or flee. So we are either going to immediately become hostile and start fighting back, just kind of blind swinging, or we're going to freeze. We're going to not know what to do. And we're going to panic and our heart's going to start racing, or we're going to flee. We're going to run away. We're going to physically get out of there, or we're going to shut down and we're going to flee into our brain and into our safe space, and we're not going to be we're going to be there physically, but not mentally. There's a fourth response that we're seeing in children now, and it's called fawning. So much like a baby doe, a fawn, these children, they just follow. The trauma is so real and they're so afraid that subordination becomes the response. So they will automatically start love bombing, throwing themselves at, trying to get positive attention from whatever has traumatized or stressed them out. So some children who have experienced traumas, which may include emotional, physical, or sexual abuse, domestic violence, multiple forms of neglect, even just adoption or foster care, incarceration or death of a caregiver, or natural disasters, medical or surgical procedures, or serious accidents. Those are the most common forms of stress or trauma that we see in children in our care. And a child who has survived a trauma may experience delays or challenging behaviors in areas like language and communication, emotional regulation, building relationships, playing and withdrawing, much like I explained at the beginning. So what causes a trauma response? So they're caused by an event or a sensation that reminds them of a traumatic experience, and their body responds as if they're actually experiencing that trauma all over again. So it could look like loud noises. So in the classroom, this could be a block structure falling or a child crying, loud or angry voices. So if children are yelling at each other or if adults are yelling, even if it's not hostile or angry. Sounds of distress or crying. So even if a child is pretending to cry, or even if you walk by the baby classroom with your preschoolers and there's clearly a baby who's hungry and getting a bottle, that trauma response to that crying might still be very real. Um, an adult touch. So sometimes when an adult rubs a child's back or is trying to be soothing, that might cause a child to react or think about a time when they didn't want to be touched. And so sometimes our attempts to comfort have a backfiring effect. And so children may have a physiological reaction to any of the examples shared and may scream, yell because of the trauma and the triggered response. And so they're mimicking their response to the trauma. So that's why trauma-informed care is important. But if children don't have access to the supports they need during stressful situations, it interrupts their ability to process, integrate, and categorize what happened to them. And so this leaves young trauma survivors at risk of being overwhelmed by feelings of distress, being unable to regulate their internal emotions and their physical states. So they're going to have, racing heartbeats, irregular breathing. They might be sweaty. They might have that pins and needles feeling. So, to support these children, early childhood settings should be safe, trauma-sensitive spaces where children or teachers support children in creating positive self-identities. I think something that's really important to consider with adults is that, like, we can say we're a safe space for other adults, but we don't necessarily get to say what somebody else needs or what is safe to them. But what we've started sharing at the office is to be brave spaces. We want to be spaces where people feel safe enough to be brave and vulnerable. And we hope that other people feel safe in our spaces. How can you include trauma-informed care in your program? Your lesson plan is going to be a big part of the day-to-day meat and potatoes of how you're performing trauma-informed care, but also it's part of the culture of your program. Working with families on how you use trauma-informed care in your everyday practices and lesson plans, asking families what special accommodations their children need, helping children process and cope with traumas. It's important that the children learn to trust you and that you're there to help them, even on things that don't feel good. Um, Children need to be able to rely on you for unconditional love, support, and encouragement. And then work on both specialists and families for those individual plans. Create Every Child Belongs referrals if you need them. Reach out to us at CCR&R, reach out to Willamette ESD, reach out to resources. We are here for you. and rely on family partnerships. So it's so important to involve families because it's important and necessary for a successful environment. So different tools that you can use to kind of bridge that family partnership gap are the ASQs, which sounds like you guys are already using, that gather information at home, figure out, if a child's really struggling at rest time, ask the family what bedtime looks like at home. If the child isn't wanting to eat much at school, ask what meal times look like at home. Conduct conferences, home visits, and have regular conversations with families so that the families can learn you and you can learn more about the child and the family. Now we are almost done, so I would like you to work on your professional action plan. So please write down 2 topics that you learned about from this training and explain how you will use them in future lesson planning. Lewis, you can share yours or just write it down. Either way is totally fine. With that being said, we are about done. If you have any questions about anything that we went over today, please feel free to shoot me an email or reach out to your coach. We are happy to go through any of this. If you want to look at the lesson planning form that your site uses and kind of ask more about how to do it on a more personal level, we're happy to get into that as well. But with that being said, that is the end. So Lewis, thank you for being here. When you exit out of the Zoom, Lewis, you're gonna get the evaluation. Everyone else, please reach out to your coach with your answers to all responses so we can give you oral credit. Thank you very much, apprentices. And Lewis, I will see you Monday at graduation. I hope you have a great afternoon.